Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 9 deeply disturbing stories from the remote cabins of Montana. These are tales of people who sought solitude in the wilderness and discovered they were never truly alone. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. My uncle's hunting cabin sat about 40 miles northwest of Kalispell, tucked into a section of forest so dense you couldn't see the sky until you were standing in the clearing. He'd built it himself back in the 70s, before anyone cared about permits or property lines. Just picked a spot where the creek bent around a flat stretch of ground and started hauling lumber. I'd been up there maybe 3 times as a kid, always with my dad and uncle both, always during hunting season when the woods felt alive with purpose. When Uncle Gerald died that February, he left the cabin to me. Not my dad, not my older brother Jake, me. The will specifically said to my nephew Cowan Mitchell, who actually appreciates silence. My girlfriend Paige thought it was sweet. I thought it was strange, but I wasn't going to argue with free property, even if it was in the middle of nowhere. I waited until late April to drive up and see what kind of shape the place was in. The road turned from asphalt to gravel to dirt to something that was basically just a suggestion of tire ruts through the brush. My phone lost signal about 20 minutes before I reached the clearing. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, its logs gone gray with age, but solid. The porch didn't even creak when I stepped on it. Inside smelled like old coffee and wood smoke, and that particular mustiness of a place that's been sealed up through winter. Everything was exactly as my uncle had left it. Cast iron skillet hanging over the stove, deck of cards on the table, his reading glasses on the windowsill. I'd brought cleaning supplies, fresh sheets, enough food for 3 days. The plan was simple: clean the place out, check for damage, maybe do some fishing in the creek. I'd been working 60-hour weeks at the firm for 8 months. My boss kept saying I looked tired. Paige kept saying I seemed distant. I just needed quiet. The first day passed uneventfully. I swept, I scrubbed, I hauled out the garbage that had accumulated. The creek was running high with snowmelt, too fast for fishing, but the sound was nice. Soothing almost. I made dinner on the propane stove, nothing fancy, just pasta from a box, and sat on the porch until the light started failing. That's when I noticed the trees, not all the trees. Just one section of them, maybe 50 yards into the forest to the east. The trunks looked darker there, like they'd been stained with something. Or maybe it was just a trick of the fading light. I told myself I'd check it out in the morning when I could see properly, when I had better light and fresh eyes. Looking back, I think part of me already knew I wouldn't. I went to bed early, bone-tired from the drive and the work. The cabin had no electricity, just a battery-powered lantern Uncle Gerald had left behind. I clicked it off around 9 and listened to the creek for a while before sleep came. The tapping woke me sometime after midnight. Light, rhythmic, almost gentle. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the north wall, the one that faced deeper into the woods. I lay there in the darkness, trying to convince myself it was a branch. The wind had picked up. I could hear it moving through the trees. A branch scraping the logs, that's all it was. Tap, tap, tap. I turned on the lantern. The tapping stopped immediately. I waited, my heart doing something unpleasant in my chest. The lantern threw shadows that seemed too long, too mobile. After maybe 5 minutes of silence, I turned the light off again. 3 seconds later, tap, tap, tap. I sat up, switched the lantern back on, and the sound ceased. This time I left the light burning and didn't sleep another minute that night. When dawn finally bled gray through the windows, I felt stupid and exhausted in equal measure. I made coffee that tasted like burnt plastic. I'd forgotten to bring good beans and went outside to examine the north wall. There were no branches near it. The nearest tree was at least 15 feet away, and its limbs didn't extend toward the cabin. I stood there in the cold morning air, my coffee going lukewarm in my hands, and stared at the weathered logs. No scratches, no marks, nothing to indicate what had made that sound. Maybe an animal, I thought, a porcupine or a raccoon. Something nocturnal that got curious and then startled when I turned on the light. That made sense, that was reasonable. I spent the second day organizing the storage shed, which was even more chaotic than the cabin. Uncle Gerald had kept everything: rusty tools, half-empty paint cans, coils of rope so old they crumbled when I touched them. I was pulling out a broken lantern when I found the journal. It was wedged behind a toolbox, its cover water-stained and warped. My uncle's handwriting filled the pages in neat, careful lines. Most of it was mundane: notes about repairs he'd made, observations about wildlife, complaints about his knees. But there was an entry from 2 years ago, dated October 14th, that made me stop. The tapping came back last night. Third time this month, always on the north wall, always stops when I shine a light. I know what it wants me to do. It wants me to go out there and look. I won't. I'm not fool enough for that. In the morning, I'll find marks on the logs, small scratches arranged in groups of 3. By noon, they'll be gone. This is how it's been for 20 years. We have an understanding now. It stays in the trees. I stay in the cabin. When one of us breaks the agreement, I don't know what will happen. I don't want to find out. I read the entry 3 times, then I shoved the journal back behind the toolbox and tried to pretend I hadn't seen it. That evening, I started packing. I told myself I'd done enough work for one trip, that Paige probably missed me, that I had emails piling up at the office. All reasonable excuses. I'd leave at first light. I was loading my duffel bag when I heard it, not tapping this time. Whistling. Someone was whistling a tune I almost recognized, something that tickled the edge of memory. It was coming from the woods to the north, where the trees looked darker. The melody was cheerful, the kind of thing you'd whistle while working. But there was something wrong with the spacing of the notes, like whoever was whistling had to think too hard about what came next. I went to the window. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. I couldn't see anyone in the trees. The whistling continued, and then very clearly I heard my uncle's voice call out, "Cowan, come see what I found." My mouth went dry. The voice was perfect. His exact tone, his inflection, even the way he'd always pronounced my name with emphasis on the first syllable. "Cowan, not Cowan. Cowan, get out here, you've got to see this." I stood frozen by the window. My uncle had been dead for 3 months. I'd been to his funeral. I'd watched them lower his casket into frozen February ground. The voice called again, farther away now, deeper in the trees. "Don't you want to see? I've been waiting to show you." I grabbed the lantern with shaking hands and turned it to its brightest setting, then pointed it out the window. The beam cut through the growing darkness, illuminating tree trunks and undergrowth and absolutely nothing else. The whistling had stopped. The voice had stopped. I backed away from the window and sat on the bed, the lantern clutched against my chest. My rational mind was screaming explanations: auditory hallucination from lack of sleep, stress-induced paranoia, maybe some kind of bird that mimics human speech. But my body wasn't listening to my rational mind. My body was telling me to run. I didn't leave at first light. I left at 2 a.m. after 4 hours of sitting on that bed with every light burning, listening to footsteps circle the cabin. Slow, patient footsteps that paused at each window, that tested the door handle 3 separate times, that finally stopped just before dawn. When I loaded my truck, I did it fast, throwing everything in the bed without bothering to organize. I didn't lock the cabin door. I didn't look back at the north wall to see if there were scratches. 3 hours later, when I had cell signal again, I called a real estate agent in Kalispell. The cabin went on the market the following week. I sold it to a couple from Seattle who wanted an authentic wilderness retreat. I didn't tell them about the tapping or the whistling or my uncle's journal. I told myself they'd probably be fine. Sometimes, late at night when Paige is asleep, I think about that journal entry. When one of us breaks the agreement, I don't know what will happen. My uncle died in February. He'd spent every winter at that cabin since the 70s. I wonder what happens to an agreement when one party dies. I wonder if something might feel cheated, might feel like it's owed a replacement. I changed my number 2 months ago, but last week I could have sworn I heard whistling outside my apartment window. That same wrong-spaced melody. When I looked, there was nothing there. Just a dark smudge on the glass, about hand height, that looked like it had been pressed there from the outside. Story 2. The summer I turned 33, my sister Alina convinced me to rent a cabin near Glacier National Park. She'd just gotten divorced. I just quit my job, and we both needed what she called perspective through isolation, which was Alina's way of saying we were going to drink wine in the woods and complain about our lives. We found a place on one of those vacation rental websites, a small A-frame about 8 miles from the nearest town, right on the edge of the park boundary. The photos showed a cozy interior with a loft bedroom, a stone fireplace, and windows that looked out onto an open meadow. The owner's name was Dorothy Brennan, and she left a 3-page instruction sheet that covered everything from the septic system to where she kept the emergency candles. Alina drove up from Billings, I drove down from Calgary, and we met at the cabin on a Wednesday afternoon in late July. The weather was perfect, sunny, warm, that particular kind of mountain light that makes everything look sharper and more real. We spent the first day hiking an easy trail, cooking dinner together, laughing about stupid things from our childhood. It felt good, healing almost. I'd been walking around with this tight feeling in my chest for months, and for the first time in a while I could breathe properly. The meadow behind the cabin was full of wildflowers, purple lupins, Indian paintbrush, something yellow that Alina said was arrowleaf balsam root. We ate breakfast on the back deck that second morning, watching 2 deer graze at the far edge of the clearing. They were completely unafraid, barely glancing at us. "This is exactly what I needed," Alina said. She was wearing our mom's old cardigan, the one with the holes in the elbows. "We should do this every year." "Every year," I agreed, though I was already thinking about money and jobs and all the reasons why that wouldn't happen. We were doing dishes, or rather, I was doing dishes while Alina dried when we heard the child crying. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. A kid's voice sobbing in that hiccuping way that means they've been crying for a while. The sound was coming from the woods that bordered the north side of the meadow. Alina and I looked at each other. "Did Dorothy mention having grandkids?" she asked. "She didn't mention anyone." I dried my hands on the towel. The crying continued, punctuated by small gasping sounds. We went outside, walking across the deck and down into the meadow. The grass was knee-high in places, still damp with morning dew. The crying got louder as we approached the tree line, and I felt that tight feeling return to my chest. Something about the sound was off. The rhythm was too regular, maybe. Or the pitch was too consistent. "Hello," Alina called out. "Are you okay? Where are you?" The crying stopped instantly. We stood there in the meadow, the sun warm on our shoulders, listening to absolutely nothing, not even birds. The sudden silence felt heavy, oppressive. "Maybe we should," I started to say, but Alina was already moving toward the trees. "There might be a lost kid out here. We can't just ignore it." She was right, of course. We spent the next 20 minutes searching the edge of the woods, calling out, listening for any response. Nothing, just trees and shadows and the normal sounds of the forest slowly returning, wind through leaves, a distant crow. We went back to the cabin. Alina made us tea, which felt very her, very let's have tea and everything will make sense. I kept looking out the window at those trees. "Probably hikers camping nearby," Alina said. "Sound carries weird in the mountains." "Kid probably got scared. Parents comforted them, they moved on." "Yeah," I said, Probably. That explanation lasted until 3 a.m. when the crying woke us both. This time it was right outside the cabin, right outside our bedroom window on the first floor where I'd been sleeping because Elena wanted the loft. The same child's voice, sobbing and hiccuping, close enough that I could hear individual gasps for breath. I didn't get up. I lay there in the darkness, my heart hammering, listening to that sound. After maybe 2 minutes, Elena's voice came from the loft. "Daphne, are you hearing this?" "Yes." "What do we do?" I didn't have an answer. The rational thing would be to turn on the lights, go outside with a flashlight, check on whoever was out there. That's what normal people would do, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to stay in bed, stay still, pretend I heard nothing. The crying moved. I could track it by sound. It went from my window to the back door, then around to the side of the cabin, then to the front. A slow circuit, like someone walking the perimeter. When it reached Elena's window in the loft, she made a small, scared sound. Then the crying stopped, and we heard the voice clearly. "Please let me in. I'm scared, please." It was a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, a little girl. Elena climbed down from the loft. In the darkness, I heard her footsteps, heard her hand on the light switch. "Don't," I said. "There's a kid out there. Don't turn on the light." She flipped the switch anyway. The cabin flooded with light from the overhead fixtures, and I squeezed my eyes shut against the sudden brightness. When I opened them, Elena was standing by the back door, her hand on the deadbolt. "Elena, wait." She unlocked the door and pulled it open. The deck was empty. The meadow beyond was empty. In the moonlight, I could see clear across to the tree line, and there was nothing moving, no one standing there. "Hello," Elena called out. Her voice sounded small. "Where are you?" From inside the cabin, from the loft bedroom directly above us, the child's voice answered. "Up here." Elena and I both looked at the ceiling. Neither of us moved. We'd both been downstairs. The cabin only had one entrance. There was no way anyone could have gotten past us and climbed up to the loft. The crying started again directly overhead. Small footsteps crossed the loft floor, the boards creaking in a pattern that was too light for an adult, but definitely something with weight, something real. I grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her out onto the deck. She didn't resist. We backed away from the cabin, and that's when I saw it in the loft window. A pale shape pressed against the glass. Small hands spread flat, a round face, features I couldn't quite make out in the darkness. But the proportions were wrong somehow. The arms were too long, or the head was too large, or the shape pulled back from the window and disappeared into the darkness of the loft. Elena was shaking. "What the fuck was that?" "Get in the car," I said. "Right now." We ran to Elena's Honda, still parked in the gravel driveway. She fumbled with her keys, dropped them, snatched them up again. I kept looking back at the cabin, at the loft window, expecting to see that pale shape reappear. The car started on the first try. Elena threw it in reverse, spraying gravel, not caring about the noise. We made it maybe half a mile down the access road before she had to pull over because her hands were shaking too badly to drive. We sat there in the darkness, the engine idling, neither of us saying anything for a long time. Finally, Elena spoke. "We left everything, all our clothes, my laptop, I don't care. We paid for the whole week." "Elena, I don't care." We drove to the nearest town, checked into a motel, and called Dorothy Brennan at 6 a.m. Elena told her we'd had a family emergency and needed to leave early. She didn't mention the crying or the thing in the loft. I think she was afraid Dorothy wouldn't believe us, or worse, that she would. The refund for the unused days showed up in Elena's account 2 weeks later. With it was an email from Dorothy. "So sorry you had to cut your trip short. I hope you didn't run into any trouble with the property." We've had a few guests mention strange sounds at night, but old cabins settle in funny ways. If you're ever back in the area, please consider staying again. A few guests. Strange sounds at night. Elena forwarded me the email without comment. We haven't talked about that trip since. We still see each other for holidays, still text about random things, but neither of us has suggested another cabin getaway. Last month she sent me a link to the same rental listing. Apparently it's still available, still getting bookings. I looked at the photos again, that cozy A-frame, the stone fireplace, the loft bedroom with its dormer windows. In one of the photos, if you look carefully at the loft window from outside, there's something pale in the corner, just a reflection probably, a trick of the light, but I saved the photo anyway, zoomed in as far as it would go. Those aren't hands, not quite. The fingers are too long, the palms too narrow, and the face, what I'd thought was a face, has features in the wrong places. Elena doesn't know I have this photo. I haven't shown her. Some things are better left unexamined. But late at night, when I can't sleep, I think about that thing circling the cabin. I think about how it knew exactly how to sound, the right pitch, the right rhythm, the right words to make us open the door. And I wonder how many people heard that crying and didn't hesitate like I did. Didn't wait, just opened the door right away, eager to help, to save, to do the right thing. I wonder what happened to them. Story 3. I took the forestry service job because I needed money and didn't mind being alone. 6 weeks in a fire lookout tower north of Missoula, watching for smoke, recording weather data, radioing in reports twice daily. The pay wasn't great, but they provided the cabin, and after my roommate's situation in town fell apart, even an isolated tower in the mountains sounded better than sleeping on various couches. The supervisor, a woman named Rachel Winters, who looked like she'd been doing this job since the Roosevelt administration, drove me up to the site in mid-June. The road was barely a road, more like a concept of where a road might someday exist. We climbed for what felt like hours, the trees getting shorter and more twisted as elevation increased. "You'll be at 10,000 feet, Rachel said, wrestling the truck around a switchback. "Weather changes fast up here. You get a storm rolling in, you stay inside and off anything metal. Lightning's no joke." "Got it." "Radio check every morning at 8, every evening at 6. Miss 2 check-ins, we send someone up." "Understood." "Cell phones don't work. Satellite phones for emergencies only. You get lonely, you brought books, right?" I had 3 boxes of paperbacks, most of them from the library's free pile. Mystery novels, fantasy doorstoppers, a collection of Shirley Jackson stories I'd been meaning to read for years. The tower came into view around noon, a wooden structure about 40 feet tall, topped with a small cabin that had windows on all sides. It looked like someone had built a treehouse for a giant. A narrow metal staircase spiraled up the outside. "Supplies are already up there," Rachel said. "Propane, food, water purification tablets. There's a spring about a quarter-mile down the base trail. You'll need to hike down every few days to fill your containers. Wildlife's mostly deer and elk, but we've had grizzly sightings this season, so keep your bear spray handy." She gave me an orientation that consisted of pointing at equipment and telling me not to break it. The Osborne Fire Finder for pinpointing smoke locations, the weather instruments, the radio setup, the log book where I'd record everything. "Questions?" she asked. I had about 1,000, but none that she could answer. "I'm good." "All right then, I'll see you in 6 weeks. Don't burn down my forest." I watched her truck disappear down the mountain, and then I was alone. The first week was exactly what I'd expected. Boring, peaceful, slightly meditative. I'd wake up with the sun, make instant coffee on the propane stove, spend 20 minutes scanning the horizon with binoculars. Nothing but trees in every direction, an ocean of green that rolled away to distant peaks. I'd read, I'd nap, I'd watch weather patterns form and dissolve. At night, the stars were so bright they hurt to look at. I did my radio checks, recorded temperatures and wind speed and cloud cover, hiked down to the spring every 3 days with empty jugs, saw deer, saw elk, saw a moose once, huge and unconcerned, browsing on willow shrubs. On day 9, I found the scratches. They were on the outside of the cabin, low on the north-facing wall, just below the windows. 4 parallel gouges in the wood, deep enough that I could fit my fingernail into them. Fresh, too, pale wood showing through where the weathered gray had been stripped away. Bear, I thought immediately, had to be. Rachel had warned me about grizzlies. This was their territory. But the scratches were vertical, running from about knee-height down to the platform floor. Like something had been hanging off the edge of the tower and dragged its claws downward. I checked the rest of the exterior. More scratches on the west wall, same pattern, nothing on the south or east sides. That night I kept my bear spray next to the bed. The cabin suddenly felt very small, very exposed. Glass windows on all sides, no way to see what might be climbing the tower in the dark. I didn't sleep well. Every creak of wood, every gust of wind had me sitting up and reaching for the flashlight. Morning came gray and cold, storm clouds building in the west. I did my radio check, and Rachel's voice crackled back at me with the usual weather report and updates. I almost mentioned the scratches, but it seemed silly. What was she going to do? Drive up here to confirm that bears scratch things? Everything good up there, Victor? She asked. My name's Victor Chen, but everyone just uses my first name. Yeah, all good. Storm's coming in tonight. Probably a big one. Do you remember the lightning protocol? Stay inside, away from metal. That's right, write it out. It'll pass by morning. The storm hit around 8 p.m. I'd been watching it build all day, dark clouds piling up like mountains on top of mountains, the whole western sky turning the color of a bruise. The first lightning strike was so bright it left spots in my vision, and the thunder that followed was instantaneous, a crack that shook the entire tower. I'd unplugged everything electronic per Rachel's instructions. Sat on the bed in the center of the cabin, away from the windows and the metal frame. Lightning flashed again and again, turning the world outside into a series of still photographs. Trees bent sideways in the wind. Rain hammered the roof. Between thunderclaps, I heard the scraping. It started on the stairs, a metallic sound like something with claws climbing the spiral staircase. Slow and deliberate, not frantic like an animal seeking shelter, just climbing. I grabbed the flashlight, but the batteries were dead. Had I not checked them, I'd meant to check them. The emergency candles were in the storage locker, and I'd have to cross the cabin to get them past the windows where lightning kept illuminating everything in stark white flashes. The scraping reached the platform outside. It circled the cabin, and I tracked it by sound, east wall, south wall, west. Back to the north where the door was, something tested the door handle. I stopped breathing. The handle moved, slowly twisting. I'd locked it. I was certain I'd locked it, but in the next lightning flash I saw the deadbolt sliding open. The door swung inward. Lightning flashed again, and in that instant of brightness I saw what stood in the doorway. It was tall, impossibly tall. It had to be crouching to fit through the door frame, its back bent at an angle that would have crippled a person. The limbs were too thin, too long, like someone had taken a human shape and stretched it on a rack. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and underneath I could see the shadow of bones that didn't connect right. But the worst part was the face. It almost looked human, almost. The eyes were in the right place, the nose, the mouth, but the proportions were wrong by just enough to trigger something primal in my brain that screamed, "This is not right." Darkness fell as the lightning faded. I heard it step into the cabin, heard the platform creak under its weight. In the next flash, it was closer. halfway across the room, moving in that space between lightning strikes when I couldn't see. I was pressed against the far wall, my hands finding the window frame behind me. My window, the one I'd left cracked open for ventilation. I didn't think, I just pushed it open wider and climbed through. For a second, I was hanging off the side of the tower platform, 40 feet above the ground, nothing but my grip keeping me from falling. Storm screamed around me, rain hitting my face so hard it felt like needles. I got my feet onto the metal framework below the platform, started climbing down, not carefully, just moving. My hands were numb with cold and fear. The metal was slick with rain. I slipped twice, caught myself both times through pure panicked reflex. Above me, something was moving on the platform, following me down. I jumped the last 8 feet, landed wrong, felt something twist in my ankle. Didn't care. I ran. The trees in a lightning storm are supposed to be dangerous. That's what every safety guide tells you. Don't shelter under trees. But I ran into those trees anyway, because the thing behind me was more dangerous than any lightning strike. I don't know how long I ran. I lost the trail immediately. Branches tore at my face and arms. My ankle was screaming. But I kept moving, putting distance between me and the tower, until finally I couldn't hear anything behind me except thunder and my own ragged breathing. I found a boulder overhang and wedged myself underneath it, making myself as small as possible. Stayed there until dawn, shaking from cold and adrenaline, listening to the storm gradually die. When enough light filtered through the clouds, I started hiking. Not back to the tower, I wasn't going anywhere near that thing. Down, just down, following the slope of the mountain, figuring eventually I'd hit the road or the spring or something human. I reached the road 8 hours later. Rachel found me 2 hours after that, halfway through a search party operation because I'd missed my morning radio check. "Jesus Christ, Victor," she said, wrapping a thermal blanket around me. "What happened?" I told her I'd panicked during the storm, left the tower, got lost. She looked at me like she didn't quite believe it but wasn't going to push. They recovered my things from the tower. Everything was exactly where I'd left it, except the door was standing open and there were more scratches, dozens of them, covering every wall inside the cabin now. Long vertical gouges like something had been very angry. The Forestry Service chopped it up to bare activity and storm damage. They noted in their report that I'd experienced weather-related stress and decided I wasn't suitable for isolated assignments. I didn't argue. That was 4 years ago. I live in Seattle now, work in an office with 40 other people, never more than 50 feet from another human being. It's exactly what I need. But sometimes, late at night in my apartment, I'll hear scratching, just for a second, metal on metal or claws on wood. It's always the radiator or the pipes or the neighbor's cat, except last week I found scratches on my balcony door. 4 parallel gouges running vertically downward. I'm on the 8th floor. Story 4. My brother Jonah inherited the property from our grandfather, 60 acres of rough land west of Whitefish, most of it vertical, covered in lodgepole pine and rock. There was a cabin up there, though calling it a cabin was generous. It was more of a shack with delusions of grandeur, 2 rooms that had been leaking since before I was born. Jonah got it in his head that he was going to fix the place up, maybe turn it into a hunting camp he could lease out. This was peak Jonah, big plans, minimal follow-through. But he asked me to come up and help with repairs for a weekend, and I didn't have anything better to do. My girlfriend at the time, Sarah, had just moved out, and I was rattling around my house in Missoula, trying not to think about her stuff that wasn't there anymore. We drove up on a Friday in September, Jonah's truck loaded with lumber and tools and enough beer to drown our collective problems. The access road was worse than he'd described, which was saying something. We bottomed out twice, and the last mile we had to go so slowly I could have walked faster. The cabin was exactly as miserable as I remembered from childhood visits: sagging porch, roof patched with mismatched shingles, windows that had probably never opened properly. but the setting was beautiful, I'd give it that. The property sat in a narrow valley between two ridges, with a creek running through the bottom that went silver in the afternoon light. "First thing Monday, I'm calling a contractor," Jonah said, staring at the cabin with his hands on his hips. "You said that 5 years ago." "Yeah, but this time I mean it." We spent Friday afternoon clearing brush and hauling out the worst of the garbage that had accumulated inside. Mice had gotten into everything. The ceiling had several active leaks. The floor in the smaller room had soft spots that flexed under weight. Saturday we started on the roof, pulling off old shingles and checking the plywood underneath for rot. It was hot work, even at that elevation, and by noon we were both sunburned and sore. Jonah went down to the creek to refill our water bottles while I kept working. That's when I found the symbols. They were carved into the underside of the shingles we'd pulled off. Not all of them, just a dozen or so, scattered across the roof. Rough marks like someone had used a nail or a screwdriver to scratch them in. Circles with lines through them, triangles, something that might have been a stick figure with too many limbs. "Jonah, come look at this," I called down. He climbed back up, looked at the shingles I'd set aside. "What the hell? You think Grandpa did this?" "Grandpa?" Jonah laughed. "Grandpa could barely write his own name. Maybe kids broke in and vandalized the place. On the underside of the roof shingles, that shut him up." We stared at the marks for a while, neither of us saying what we were both thinking, that someone had gone to a lot of trouble to hide symbols where they'd normally never be seen. We kept working. By evening, we'd finished one section of roof and started on another. The sun was setting when I found the second set of symbols, these ones carved into the wooden beam that ran along the peak. Deeper marks, older, same designs. "Maybe it's a Native American thing," Jonah suggested. "Like a blessing or protection or something." I didn't think so, but I didn't have a better explanation. We cooked dinner on a camp stove, just hot dogs and beans, nothing fancy, and ate on the porch while the light faded from the valley. It was peaceful. The kind of quiet you only get in the mountains, so complete it almost rings in your ears. "You doing okay?" Jonah asked. "With the Sarah thing?" "I'm fine." "You're clearly not fine, man. You've lost like 15 pounds. "I said I'm fine." He let it drop. We finished eating, cleaned up, settled in for the night. The cabin had 2 cots set up in the main room and we'd brought sleeping bags. Jonah was asleep in minutes, snoring softly. I lay awake, looking at the ceiling. In the darkness, I kept thinking about those symbols, the placement of them. Like someone had wanted them hidden, but also positioned carefully, strategically. Protection, Jonah had said, but protection from what? I must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke to Jonah shaking my shoulder. "Mason, wake up. There's something outside." I sat up, disoriented. It was still dark, the kind of absolute darkness you get miles from any artificial light. "What?" "Listen." I listened. At first I heard nothing, and then I caught it, footsteps on the porch. Slow, heavy, deliberate, something moving back and forth across the wooden planks from one end to the other and back again. We both sat frozen. The footsteps stopped at the door. The handle rattled once, twice. Then the footsteps resumed, moving to the window. A face appeared in the glass. I only saw it for a second before Jonah's flashlight clicked on, and then there was nothing there, just our own reflections staring back at us. "Did you see?" Jonah started. "Yeah." We got up, moved to the window carefully. The flashlight beam showed the porch empty, the clearing beyond empty, nothing moving. "Animal," Jonah said, but his voice was uncertain. "Animals don't try door handles." "So what then? A person?" I didn't answer, because what I'd seen in that window wasn't quite a person. The face had been wrong, elongated. like someone had taken a human face and pulled it vertically, stretching everything out of proportion. And the eyes had been in the right place, but they'd been too large, too dark, like empty pits. We stayed up the rest of the night, taking turns watching the windows. Nothing else happened. When dawn finally came, gray and slow, we went outside to check for tracks. There were prints in the dirt by the porch steps, barefoot prints, human-shaped but not quite right. The toes were too long, the arch too high. They circled the cabin multiple times, then led off into the woods to the north. "We should go home," I said. Jonah looked at the prints, then at the cabin, then at his truck loaded with unused building supplies. "We drove all the way up here." "Jonah, look at those tracks. Does that look normal to you?" He didn't answer right away. "Finally, let's at least eat breakfast, pack up properly. We'll be out of here by noon." I should have insisted we leave immediately. But I was tired and hungry, and part of me still wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation. We went back inside, started making coffee and eggs on the camp stove. That's when we heard the voice. It came from the smaller room, the one with the soft floor. A woman's voice, quiet and sad. "Help me, please help me." Jonah and I looked at each other. Neither of us moved. "I'm trapped," the voice continued. "I've been here so long, please." It was my mom's voice. My mother, who'd been dead for 6 years. The same voice that used to sing me to sleep when I was little, the same accent, the same cadence. "That's not her," I whispered. "Help me, Mason, help me, Jonah, my boys, please." Jonah took a step toward the smaller room. I grabbed his arm. "Don't. That's Mom's." "It's not Mom. Mom's dead." The voice changed. It dropped lower, became rougher. Then who am I? The door to the smaller room swung open. The floor in there, those soft spots we'd noticed, they were moving, bulging upward like something underneath was pushing up. We ran. I don't remember the details clearly. I know we left everything, tools, supplies, sleeping bags, food. I know Jonah had trouble getting the truck started, and for a horrible moment I thought we were stuck there. I know I looked back at the cabin once and saw something standing in the doorway, something tall and wrong. The truck started on the third try. Jonah drove like he was trying to qualify for NASCAR, bouncing over ruts and rocks, not caring when we scraped the undercarriage. We made it to the highway in half the time it had taken us to drive up. We didn't talk about it, not then, not in the weeks after. Jonah sold the property 6 months later to a developer from California, took a loss on the deal. The buyer wanted to put up a vacation home. I tried to warn them, but what was I supposed to say? There's something wrong with that land, something that lives under the cabin, something that knows your voice. They broke ground last spring. I don't know if they tore down the original cabin or built around it. I don't know if they found the symbols carved into the wood or if they understood what they meant. I do know that 3 weeks ago, I got a Facebook message from someone I didn't know. The profile picture showed the cabin, or where the cabin had been. A construction site, a foundation. The message said, "You used to own this property. Do you know anything about its history? We've been having problems, things moving at night, voices. Our contractor quit without explanation. If you know anything, please call." I didn't respond. I blocked the account. Some properties aren't meant to be developed. Some places aren't meant to be disturbed. My grandfather knew that. Why else would he have carved those symbols, tried to seal something in? We broke those seals. We pulled apart his protections and let it out. And now someone else is dealing with what we left behind. I try not to think about it, but sometimes late at night I still hear that voice. My mother's voice calling my name, asking for help. Getting closer. Story 5. The wildlife photography assignment was supposed to be simple. 2 weeks in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, capturing images of elk during the autumn rut. I'd done this kind of work before dozens of times. Alone in the backcountry with my cameras and camping gear, just me and whatever animals I could find. It was the part of my job I liked best, actually, away from clients and deadlines and the constant buzz of civilization. I started at the Holland Lake trailhead on a Tuesday morning, late September. The aspens were turning gold, and the air had that crisp quality that promised snow within weeks. My pack was heavy, 60 pounds of camera equipment, food, and camping supplies, but I was used to it. I planned to hike about 8 miles in, set up a base camp, and spend the next 2 weeks working in a radius around it. The trail was well maintained, popular with hikers and horse packers. I passed a few people heading out as I was heading in, a couple with matching North Face jackets, a guy who looked like he'd been out for a while based on the state of his beard. Everyone nodded, exchanged pleasantries, moved on. By late afternoon, I'd reached the area I'd scouted on maps, a meadow system near Big Salmon Creek, good sight lines, plenty of elk sign. I set up my tent in a clearing surrounded by spruce trees, cached my food properly in a bear bag, spent the last hour of light scouting for good vantage points. The photography went well those first few days. I got some decent shots of a young bull practicing his buckling, a group of cows grazing in morning light, a massive old bull that let me get within 100 yards before he noticed and drifted off into the timber. Perfect. Exactly what my client wanted. On day 5, I found the cabin. It wasn't on any map. I'd hiked farther south than planned, following a particularly photogenic bull, and came across it in a small bowl valley about 2 miles from my camp. Old, maybe from the 30s or 40s, built from logs that had gone silver with age. The roof was intact, which surprised me. Most abandoned cabins up here had long since collapsed. The door hung open. I approached carefully, called out to make sure nobody was home. No answer. Inside was surprisingly tidy, a cot with a thin mattress, a small wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, like someone had just stepped out for a walk and would be back any minute. On the table was a notebook. Curious, I flipped it open. The entries were dated from 1967. A man's handwriting, angular and cramped. July 15, arrived at the cabin. Will spend the summer collecting samples. Weather clear. July 28, found unusual tracks near the creek. Too large for any cat. Unclear what made them. August 3, the tracks appear nightly now, circling the cabin. Whatever it is, it's watching. August 10, last night it scratched at the door. I did not open it. I will not open it. The entries continued through August, becoming more fragmented and desperate. The last entry was dated August 24. It knows my name now. It calls to me using Father's voice. I have stayed inside for 3 days. Food running low. I think it can wait longer than I can. The page ended there. I flipped through the rest of the notebook, blank pages. I stood in that cabin, my camera hanging heavy around my neck, and felt cold despite the afternoon warmth. I should have left immediately. Hiked back to my camp, packed up, headed out. But I was 5 days in, I had a deadline, and some stubborn part of me refused to abandon a project because of some old journal entry from 50 years ago. I rationalized. Guy had probably been alone too long, got spooked, left the area and was fine. Happens to solo hikers sometimes. Isolation can play tricks on the mind. I took a photo of the journal entry just for documentation, I told myself, and hiked back to my camp. That night I woke to something walking around my tent. I lay perfectly still, listening. Heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate. They circled once, twice, 3 times, then stopped at my tent door. I could see the shape of it through the nylon, tall, broad-shouldered, standing absolutely motionless. After maybe 30 seconds, it moved away. I heard it walking through the forest, branches breaking until the sound faded completely. In the morning, I checked for tracks, found them immediately, large barefoot prints, easily 13 inches long, pressed deep into the soft earth near my tent. The stride length was impossibly long, nearly 4 feet between prints. Not elk, not moose, not any animal I could identify. I told myself it was a grizzly. Bear tracks can sometimes look almost human if the ground is soft and the details blur. It was the only explanation that made sense, but I'd seen a lot of bear tracks in my career. These weren't bear tracks. I spent that day taking photos like normal, but I couldn't focus. Kept looking over my shoulder, checking behind me. That evening, back at camp, I moved my bear bag to a different tree and sat with my back against a log, watching the forest as darkness fell. Around midnight, I heard my name, Thomas, my father's voice calling from the trees to the west. The same tone he'd used to call me in for dinner when I was a kid, patient, expectant. "Thomas, come here, I found something." My father had been dead for 8 years. Heart attack in his office, quick and clean. I'd been there for the funeral, watched them lower his casket. The voice called again, still patient. "Thomas, don't make me come get you." I sat very still, my headlamp off, trying to control my breathing. I thought about the journal entry. It knows my name now. The voice moved, circling my camp at a distance. Sometimes it was my father, sometimes my ex-wife Sarah, once my sister Kate. Always patient, always trying to draw me out. "Thomas, I can see your tent. I know you're in there, don't be rude." I waited until dawn. When the first gray light filtered through the trees, the voices stopped. I packed my camp in record time, didn't bother with breakfast, didn't worry about organizing anything properly. Just shoved it all in my pack and started hiking out. Made it maybe a quarter mile before I saw it. It was standing on the trail ahead of me, tall, maybe 7 feet. Thin to the point of emaciation, ribs visible under pale skin, arms that hung nearly to its knees. And the face, it was almost human, would pass for human from a distance, but up close all the proportions were slightly off. Eyes too far apart, mouth too wide, nose that didn't quite sit right. It tilted its head when it saw me like a curious dog. "Why are you leaving, Thomas?" It spoke in my father's voice, but the mouth didn't move properly, like it was still learning how mouths worked. "Stay, we can talk." I backed away slowly. It took a step forward, matching my pace. "I found your camera," it said, switching to Sarah's voice now. "Such beautiful photos. You're very talented, Thomas. Show me how it works." It was wearing something. At first I thought it was clothes, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was bark. Strips of white birch bark draped over its shoulders like a shawl, tied around its waist, and on the bark were symbols, circles and triangles and stick figures scratched into the surface. The same symbols I'd seen in the cabin journal. I dropped my pack and ran. It chased me. I could hear it crashing through the undergrowth, keeping pace easily. I veered off the trail, hoping to lose it in thick timber, but it followed. The sounds it made when it moved weren't right, too fluid, too fast for something so large. I don't know how long I ran, felt like hours. My lungs were burning, legs shaking. I stumbled down a slope, hit the bottom, found myself in a creek. Big Salmon Creek. I knew this place. My camp was maybe a mile upstream. The sounds behind me had stopped. I stood in the creek, water soaking my boots, trying to hear over my own ragged breathing. Nothing. The forest was absolutely silent. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Then I heard my own voice. It was calling from downstream. "Hello, is someone there? I need help." My voice perfect in every way. Same accent, same speech patterns. If I'd heard that call without context, I would have thought it was my own recording. "Please, I'm injured. I can't walk. Hello." It was trying to lure other hikers, using my voice to sound helpless, vulnerable. Anyone who came to help would find that thing instead. I climbed out of the creek and hiked parallel to it, staying in the trees, moving as quietly as I could. Every few minutes I'd hear my voice calling from different locations. It was tracking me, trying to predict where I'd go. I reached my camp by mid-afternoon. The tent was shredded, completely destroyed. My food bag had been torn down and scattered. On the ground, arranged carefully, were my cameras, all 4 of them laid out in a neat row. The lens caps had been removed. The viewfinders were smashed like something had pressed its eye against them too hard. I grabbed my emergency beacon from the remains of my pack, activated it, and kept moving. The trail was another 3 miles. If I could reach it, maybe I'd be safe. Maybe this thing stayed in the backcountry, didn't follow people to populated areas. I made it to the trailhead just before dark. A park ranger was already there, responding to my beacon signal. Friendly guy, concerned, asking if I was injured. I told him I'd gotten turned around, panicked, hit the beacon, felt stupid about it. He gave me a ride back to my truck, told me it happens to everyone eventually, don't feel bad. I didn't mention the thing in the woods. What was I supposed to say? There's something out there that wears bark and knows your voice and watches you while you sleep. The photos I'd taken of the journal entry were on my camera, or they had been. When I got home and checked the memory card, that image was gone, just that one. Everything else was intact: elk, landscapes, camp shots, but the journal entry had been deleted. I haven't been back to the Bob Marshall, turned down 3 assignments in that area over the past 2 years. My agent thinks I'm being difficult. My editor thinks I've gotten soft. Last month I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a piece of birch bark with symbols scratched into it, and a note written in cramped, angular handwriting. He didn't leave either, neither will you. It's patient, it can wait. I burned it, the bark, the note, all of it. But I kept finding pieces of bark around my house, on the porch, tucked under my windshield wiper, once inside my mailbox. Always the same symbols. I'm moving, maybe East Coast, maybe somewhere without many trees, somewhere it can't follow. But last night, I heard my father's voice outside my bedroom window. Thomas, come here, I found something. And I'm starting to think distance won't matter. Story thick. I came up to my boyfriend's family cabin outside of Helena because he promised me a weekend of peace and quiet. Brandon had been talking about this place for months, how remote it was, how beautiful, how his family had owned it since the 50s. A real getaway, he said. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just us and nature. It sounded perfect. Work had been crushing me, 60-hour weeks at the hospital, and I desperately needed to not look at a screen or hear a pager or smell disinfectant for 48 hours. We drove up on a Friday evening in October, his pickup loaded with groceries and firewood and enough blankets to survive a siege. The road got progressively worse as we climbed, until we were basically driving through a forest with optimistic tire ruts. "You sure this is the right way?" I asked after we bottomed out for the 3rd time. "Positive. Dad makes this drive every hunting season." The cabin appeared around a bend, small, maybe 3 rooms with a covered porch and a stone chimney. Forest pressed in on all sides, dense and dark despite the late afternoon sun. Brandon parked in a clearing that might generously be called a driveway. "Here we are." He seemed genuinely excited. "Let me show you around." Inside was rustic in the way only family hunting cabins can be. Mismatched furniture, animal heads mounted on the walls, a propane stove that looked older than me. But it was clean, and the windows let in good light, and there was a wood stove that Brandon immediately set about lighting. "So what do you think, Jules?" "Julia, but everyone calls me Jules." "It's nice, really, very woody." He laughed. "Just wait until you see the stars tonight. No light pollution out here." We made dinner together, pasta, nothing fancy, and ate on the porch while the sun set. Brandon was right about the stars. As darkness fell, the sky absolutely exploded with them. More stars than I'd ever seen in my life, so many it almost didn't look real. "See," he put his arm around me. "This is exactly what we needed." I agreed. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tension starting to unwind from my shoulders. We went to bed early, exhausted from the drive and the altitude. The bedroom was small, just enough room for a double bed and a dresser, but the mattress was surprisingly comfortable. I fell asleep to the sound of wind in the pines and Brandon's gentle snoring. Something woke me around 3 a.m. A sound, rhythmic and soft. Tap, 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 tap. I lay there listening, trying to place it. It was coming from outside, from the wall behind the bed. Probably a branch, I thought, wind blowing something against the logs. Tap, tap, tap. "Brandon," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. "You hear that?" He mumbled something and rolled over. The tapping stopped. I waited, but it didn't resume. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. Morning was beautiful, cold and crisp, mist rising from the ground in the clearings. We hiked for a few hours on old logging roads, saw deer, collected pine cones that Brandon insisted were the perfect size for some project he'd thought of. We were both in a good mood, laughing about nothing, enjoying the simplicity of being away from everything. That afternoon, while Brandon was chopping firewood, I explored the cabin more thoroughly. Opened closets, checked drawers, generally snooped like you do in someone else's place. In the back of a kitchen cabinet, I found a metal lockbox. It wasn't locked. Inside were papers, old property documents, family letters, nothing particularly interesting. But underneath was a photograph. It showed the cabin, probably taken in the 60s based on the color saturation. 3 people stood on the porch, a man, a woman, and a young boy. Brandon's grandparents maybe, and their son, but there was someone else in the photo. In the background at the tree line, barely visible, a pale figure, tall and thin, standing between 2 pines. At first I thought it was a trick of light, but the more I looked, the more it resolved into a shape. A person-shaped shadow with limbs that seemed too long. "Find something interesting." I jumped. Brandon had come inside, was standing behind me with an armload of firewood. "Just some old photos. This your grandparents?" He looked over my shoulder. "Yeah, that's them, and that's my dad as a kid. Cute, right? What about the person in the background?" He squinted at the photo. "What person?" "Right there, between those 2 trees. Jules, that's just shadows. You're seeing pareidolia." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was seeing patterns where none existed. I put the photo back in the lockbox and helped him stack the firewood. That night the tapping came back, louder this time, more insistent. Tap, 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 tap. "Brandon, seriously, you have to hear that." He sat up, groggy. "Hear what?" "The tapping, on the wall." We both sat in silence. The tapping had stopped. "Jules, there's nothing." Tap, tap, tap. His eyes widened. "Okay, yeah, that's probably a branch. There are no branches near that wall. We can see from outside." "Then an animal. Porcupine maybe. They chew on wood." The tapping moved. I watched Brandon's face change as he tracked the sound. It went from the back wall to the side wall to the front of the cabin, right past the bedroom door. Something was walking around the cabin, and it was tapping on the walls as it went. "Stay here," Brandon said, reaching for his flashlight. "Like hell, we go together." We crept out of the bedroom, into the main room. The tapping continued, circling around to the back of the cabin again. Brandon threw open the front door, shone his flashlight across the clearing. Nothing, just trees and darkness. "Hello," he called out. "Anyone there?" The tapping stopped. We stood on the porch, Brandon sweeping his flashlight across the tree line, neither of us speaking. Then we heard the voice. "Brandon." It came from the woods to the left, female and plaintive. "Brandon, help me, I'm lost." That was my voice, my exact voice calling Brandon's name, but I was standing right next to him. "What the fuck?" he whispered. "Brandon, please, I can't find the cabin, I'm scared." My voice perfect in every detail coming from the darkness. I grabbed Brandon's arm, felt him shaking. "That's not me," I said quietly. "I'm right here." "Brandon, why won't you answer? Are you mad at me?" The voice was moving closer. I could hear footsteps now, branches cracking, something large moving through the undergrowth. "Inside," Brandon said. "No." We backed into the cabin. He slammed the door through the deadbolt. We stood in the darkness, not daring to turn on a light. My voice outside called, "Brandon, why did you lock the door? Let me in, I'm cold." Then Brandon's voice joined it, speaking to me. "Jules, open the door. Brandon's hurt, he needs help." Two voices now, both perfect mimics, calling to us, trying to separate us. "Don't listen," I said. "Neither of us goes outside." We huddled together on the couch, Brandon's flashlight off to save batteries. The voices continued for hours, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, once saying things in Brandon's voice that made me go cold. Intimate things only he would know. Finally, around dawn, they stopped. We waited until full daylight before we opened the door. The clearing looked normal, peaceful, morning light filtering through the pines, birds singing. But the ground around the cabin told a different story. Footprints. Dozens of them circling the structure. Barefoot prints, human-shaped but wrong. The toes too long, the arch too high, the stride impossibly wide. "We're leaving," Brandon said. His face was pale, his voice shaky. "Yes." We threw our stuff in the truck, didn't bother cleaning up or closing windows or any of the normal departure routine. Just got in and drove. The truck wouldn't start. Brandon turned the key again. Nothing, not even a click. "Battery's fine," he said, checking the gauge. "Everything's fine, it should." Tap, tap, tap on the passenger window, right next to my head. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed not to look, but I turned my head anyway. It was standing there. Tall, impossibly thin, skin like birch bark, limbs that bent in too many places. The face was almost human, but the eyes were completely black and the mouth opened too wide when it smiled. It tapped on the window again with one elongated finger. Tap, tap, tap. Then it spoke in my voice. "Can I come in?" Brandon was screaming something, I don't remember what. He was turning the key over and over. The thing outside put its palm against the window and I could see the skin, or what passed for skin, was covered in tiny carved symbols. The engine caught. Brandon threw it in reverse, spraying gravel. The thing didn't move, just stood there watching us with those black eyes as we backed away. We drove for 20 minutes before either of us spoke. When we finally did, it was just, "Are you okay?" And "I don't know." Brandon called his dad the next day, told him the cabin had problems. His dad laughed, said the place had always been a little spooky. "That's just how it is when you're that isolated." I found the photograph later, the one from the lockbox. I'd shoved it in my jacket pocket without thinking. Looking at it now, the figure in the background is clearer, taller, closer to the cabin than I'd first thought. And if you look very carefully at the windows of the cabin in the photo, you can see faces looking out. Pale faces that don't match the three people standing on the porch. We haven't been back. Brandon's family still owns the property, still uses the cabin occasionally. His uncle went up there last month, said everything was fine, had a great weekend, but I noticed Brandon's dad hasn't been back, not since we told him what happened. He makes excuses, too busy, bad knees, work commitments. But I think he knows, I think he's always known. That photograph is still in my apartment. I've tried throwing it away twice, but it keeps reappearing, in my desk drawer, in my car, once in my hospital locker. And late at night, I sometimes hear my own voice outside my window, calling my name, asking to be let in. I live on the 4th floor. Story 7. The surveying job came through a contractor I'd worked with before. 3 days mapping property lines for a timber company outside of Libby. Simple work, decent pay, and I'd be done by Friday. My boss had sent me up there alone since it was straightforward, nothing that required a full crew. I drove up on a Monday morning, my equipment loaded in the back of my truck, GPS unit, surveying tools, stakes, marking paint. The property was about 12 miles into the Kootenai National Forest, accessible only by logging roads that hadn't been maintained in years. The timber company rep met me at the access gate, a guy named Hector who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "You're going in alone?" he asked when I explained my boss wasn't coming. "Yeah, why?" He shrugged. "Just seems remote, that's all. Cell service doesn't reach this far. You got a satellite phone?" "In the truck." "Good. Use it if you need anything." "Don't," he paused. "Don't wander off the marked boundaries. There's old mines up there, unstable ground, easy to get hurt." I assured him I'd be careful, and he left me with a map and a key to the timber company's equipment shed about 2 miles in. The first day went fine. I worked methodically, setting up my GPS points, marking trees, documenting everything. The forest was beautiful, old growth in sections, clear cuts from decades ago growing back, creeks running high with snowmelt. I saw elk, heard a wolf howling in the distance, generally enjoyed being out in the wilderness alone. Around 4 p.m. I reached the equipment shed. It was more substantial than I'd expected, a solid log structure, maybe 20 by 30 feet with a metal roof and a heavy padlock. Inside were chainsaws, tools, fuel cans, and in the back corner, a cot with a sleeping bag. Hector had mentioned I could sleep there if I wanted, save myself the drive back to town each day. I considered it. The drive was rough, nearly an hour each way, and staying would give me more daylight for work. I decided to stay. That first night was uneventful. I made dinner on my camp stove, read a paperback by lantern light, fell asleep to the sound of rain on the metal roof. Peaceful. The second day I worked farther east into a section of forest so dense it stayed dark even at noon. This was old growth, trees 4 feet in diameter, the ground covered in moss and ferns, everything damp and primordial. My GPS showed I was near the eastern property boundary, right where the timber company's land ended and national forest began. That's when I found the clearing. It wasn't natural. Someone had cut down the trees here maybe a decade ago, but they'd done it in a perfect circle about 50 feet across. The stumps remained, arranged in that unnaturally precise ring. In the center was a fire pit, old and unused, surrounded by stones. And around the clearing, hanging from the remaining trees, I don't know what to call them. Totems, maybe. Bundles of sticks tied together with what looked like sinew or leather, decorated with feathers and small bones. There must have been 30 of them, swaying slightly in the breeze. I stood at the edge of the clearing, feeling a deep unease I couldn't quite name. This wasn't normal. This wasn't hikers or hunters or forest service. This was something else. I took photos with my phone, documentation, I told myself, though I wasn't sure what I'd do with them. Then I marked the location on my GPS and backed away. The rest of the day I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about that clearing, those totems, the deliberate arrangement of everything. The way it felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. I worked until nearly 7 p.m., later than I should have, trying to make up for lost time. By the time I hiked back to the equipment shed, it was getting dark. I made dinner, but I wasn't hungry. Just kept looking at the photos on my phone, zooming in on those totems. The bones looked like birds mostly, small skulls, tiny vertebrae, but some of them were larger. Around 10 p.m. I heard the singing. It was distant, maybe a quarter mile away, but clear enough. Multiple voices harmonizing in a language I didn't recognize. The melody was haunting, beautiful in a deeply unsettling way. I turned off my lantern and sat in the darkness, listening. The singing continued for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped abruptly. Silence, complete, absolute silence. No insects, no wind, nothing. Then footsteps outside the shed, multiple sets walking around the perimeter. I sat very still, barely breathing. The footsteps were rhythmic, synchronized. Around and around the shed they went, maybe 5 or 6 sets, never pausing. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, they stopped. I waited another hour before I dared turn my lantern back on. In the morning, I checked outside. Footprints in the mud around the shed, dozens of them. Barefoot prints, human-sized but somehow not quite right. They circled the building multiple times, overlapping and intersecting. I should have left then. Packed up, driven back to town, told the contractor the job wasn't worth it. But I only had one more day of work, and I'd already completed most of it. One more day and I'd be done. I worked fast that third day, rushing through my measurements, not bothering to double-check everything like I normally would. I avoided the eastern section, the area near that clearing. Stayed in the western section where the forest felt more normal. By 4 p.m. I was finished. I hiked back to the shed, planning to pack up and get out before dark. The door was open. I knew I'd locked it. I was certain I'd locked it, but it stood open, the padlock hanging from the hasp undone. I approached cautiously. "Hello? Anyone here?" No answer. I looked inside. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. My gear, my sleeping bag, the timber company's equipment. Nothing disturbed. Except on my sleeping bag, placed carefully in the center, was a totem. One of the stick bundles I'd seen in the clearing, decorated with feathers and small bones. I didn't touch it. I backed out of the shed, went to my truck, and started loading equipment. I'd leave the totem, leave the sleeping bag if necessary. I just wanted out. The truck wouldn't start. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch. I tried again and again. Nothing. I popped the hood. Everything looked fine, battery connected, no obvious problems. I wasn't a mechanic, but I knew the basics and nothing seemed wrong. Behind me from the forest, the singing started again. Closer this time, much closer, and moving toward me. I grabbed my satellite phone and started dialing. The singing got louder. I could see movement in the trees now, shapes moving between the trunks. Multiple figures, too tall and too thin, moving with that same synchronized rhythm I'd heard in the footsteps. The phone connected. A voice on the other end. "Emergency services, what's your?" The line went dead. The phone screen showed no signal, which was impossible. Satellite phones don't lose signal like that. The singing stopped. The figures stepped out of the tree line. There were 7 of them. They looked human at first glance. 2 arms, 2 legs ahead, but the proportions were wrong. Arms too long, legs that bent at too many joints, heads that tilted at impossible angles. They were decorated with paint or maybe scarification, patterns that seemed to move in the fading light. They stood at the edge of the clearing, perfectly still, watching me. The tallest one stepped forward. When it opened its mouth, my mother's voice came out. "Stay, join us, we've been waiting." I ran, not toward the truck, not toward the road, into the forest, away from those things, crashing through undergrowth and over logs. I could hear them behind me, moving faster than I could, their footsteps synchronized and rhythmic. I don't know how long I ran. I lost my GPS, my phone, everything except the clothes on my back. Eventually, I hit a creek and followed it downstream, remembering vague survival advice about water leading to civilization. I found a logging road around midnight. Followed it until dawn, every shadow making me jump. A Forest Service truck found me around 7 a.m., dehydrated and incoherent. They searched for my truck and equipment, found everything eventually, the truck in perfect working order, my gear neatly organized, no sign of any disturbance. The equipment shed had been burned down. Recent fire, the investigator said, probably within the last 24 hours. Accelerant used, deliberate. They found the totem in the ashes. somehow intact, barely even singed. I quit surveying. Took an office job in Great Falls, somewhere flat and treeless and safe. The contractor tried to bill me for the lost equipment, but my lawyer made that go away. Last week, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address, no postage, just appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a photo. It showed me in the forest from behind, standing at the edge of that circular clearing. I'm looking at the totems, but in the trees around the clearing, barely visible, are figures. Dozens of them, circling, watching. I don't remember seeing anyone when I was there. The photo is wrong somehow, has to be wrong, but the clothes match what I was wearing. The equipment on my belt is correct. And in the bottom corner, someone had written in neat handwriting, "Come back, we're still waiting." I've moved 3 times since then. The photos keep finding me. Story 8. My best friend Alana and I had been planning the trip for months. A week in Montana, just the 2 of us, hiking and camping before she moved to Portland for grad school. We'd been friends since middle school, and this felt like a last hurrah before adult life scattered us in different directions. We flew into Bozeman in August, rented a car, and drove north toward the Scapegoat Wilderness. Alana had found this trail system online, moderately difficult, beautiful views, not too crowded. Perfect. The first 3 days were exactly what we'd hoped for. Blue skies, wildflowers, mountain vistas that made us stop and just stare. We camped at designated sites, saw other hikers occasionally, felt perfectly safe and happy. On day 4, we decided to take a side trail that wasn't on our main map. A local hiker we'd met mentioned it, said it led to an incredible waterfall, totally worth the detour. Just a few miles off the main route. We found the turnoff around noon and started hiking in. The trail was less maintained than the main route, more overgrown, but still clearly a path. The forest here felt older somehow, the trees more massive, the undergrowth more dense. After about 2 hours, we realized we should have reached the waterfall by now. The trail had become progressively less clear until we weren't entirely sure we were still on a trail at all. "Maybe we should turn back," I suggested. "My name's Kenji, by the way. Kenji Nakamura. My parents are from Osaka, but I grew up in Seattle." "Just a little farther," Alana said. "I think I hear water." She was right, there was a rushing sound ahead. We pushed through a thick stand of willows and emerged into a small valley. There was a cabin there. It sat in a clearing beside a creek, old but not ruined. The logs were weathered gray, the roof was mostly intact, and there was even glass in some of the windows. Smoke rose from the chimney. "Someone's here," Alana said, stating the obvious. We approached cautiously. It's not unusual to find cabins in the backcountry, old homesteads, hunting camps, Forest Service buildings, but an occupied cabin this far from any road, that was weird. "Hello," Alana called out. "Anyone home?" The door opened. A woman stepped out, maybe 60 years old, wearing clothes that looked handmade, leather pants, a wool sweater, boots that had been resoled multiple times. She looked at us without surprise, like she'd been expecting visitors. "You're far from the main trail," she said, not unfriendly, just factual. "We're looking for a waterfall," I explained. "Someone said there was one around here." "No waterfall on this side of the valley." She studied us for a moment. "You planning to camp nearby?" "We were thinking about heading back to the main trail before dark." "You won't make it before dark. Sun sets earlier in this valley. You're welcome to camp here in the clearing." "I don't mind company." Alana and I exchanged glances. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint what. The woman seemed nice enough. And she was right about the time. It was already 4 p.m. and the hike back would take at least 3 hours. "That's very kind," Alana said. "If you're sure we wouldn't be imposing." "No imposition. I'll make stew if you want to join me for dinner. Been a while since I've had anyone to talk to." We set up our tent in the clearing while the woman, she said her name was Margaret, cooked inside the cabin. The smell of food was incredible after days of freeze-dried camping meals. She called us in around 7 p.m. The cabin interior was surprisingly cozy, a wood stove, a table with chairs, shelves lined with jars of preserved food. Everything was immaculately clean, organized. The stew was venison, rich and savory, with potatoes and carrots and herbs. We ate hungrily, making conversation. Margaret asked about our lives, our plans, seemed genuinely interested. She told us she'd been living up here for quite some time, preferred solitude, made trips to town a few times a year for supplies she couldn't produce herself. "Don't you get lonely?" Alana asked. Margaret smiled. "I have company, just not the kind that talks much." After dinner, we thanked her and returned to our tent. The night was clear, stars brilliant overhead. I felt full and content and ready for sleep. "That was nice," Alana said, zipping our tent closed. She seemed sweet. "Yeah, a little odd but sweet." We were both asleep within minutes. I woke to Alana shaking my shoulder. "Kenji, wake up, listen." I listened, heard nothing at first, then caught it, singing. A woman's voice coming from inside the cabin. Margaret singing something in a language I didn't recognize. The melody was sad, haunting. "She's just singing," I said groggily. "So what?" "She's been singing the same verse over and over for 20 minutes. The exact same melody, no variation. It's like a loop." Now that Alana mentioned it, I could hear it. The same phrase repeated endlessly, never changing, not like someone singing for pleasure, like a recording. "Maybe she has a mental thing," I whispered, "some kind of condition." "Maybe." Alana didn't sound convinced. We lay there listening for another hour. The singing never changed, never stopped. Finally, Alana unzipped the tent. "I'm going to check on her, make sure she's okay." "Alana, wait." But she was already crawling out. I grabbed my flashlight and followed. We approached the cabin quietly. The singing continued from inside, that same endless loop. Alana knocked on the door. The singing stopped instantly. Silence, long enough that I started feeling uneasy. Then Margaret's voice, bright and normal. "Yes, who is it?" "It's Alana and Kenji. We heard you singing and wanted to make sure everything was okay." "Oh, how sweet. Everything's fine, just couldn't sleep. Sorry if I disturbed you." "No problem. We'll let you be. Good night." "Good night, dears." We walked back to the tent. Halfway there, Alana grabbed my arm. "Kenji, look at the cabin." I looked. The windows were dark, all of them. No candle light, no lamp, nothing, but we'd clearly heard Margaret's voice close to the door, like she'd been standing right there. "She blew out her candles," I suggested weakly. "All of them, instantly, in the half-second between when the singing stopped and when she answered." I didn't have a good answer for that. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. Sat in our tent, listening, watching the cabin through the mesh window. No light appeared, no sound came from inside, but around 3 a.m. we saw movement, shapes crossing the clearing, 4 or 5 of them, maybe more. They moved strangely, flowing more than walking. They went to the cabin, circled it once, then vanished into the forest on the other side of the clearing. "What the fuck were those?" Alana's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know." We waited for dawn. It came slowly, painfully. When there was enough light to see clearly, we packed our tent as quietly and quickly as possible. The cabin door opened. Margaret stepped out, smiling. "Leaving so early, I was going to make breakfast." "We need to get back to the main trail," I said, trying to sound casual. "Thanks for letting us camp here." "Of course, safe travels." She paused. "You know, most people who find this valley don't leave." "What do you mean?" just that it's a special place. People feel drawn to stay. I felt that way too when I first arrived." Her smile widened. "That was in 1952. She looked 60. If she'd arrived in 1952, she'd be over 90. "We really need to go," Alana said, shouldering her pack. "I understand, but you'll be back. They always come back." We hiked out fast, not caring about the noise we made or the branches that slapped our faces. Behind us, that singing started again, the same melody looping endlessly. We found the main trail around noon. Took us another full day to hike out to the trailhead. We reported the cabin's location to a ranger station, said we'd met an elderly woman who might need a wellness check. The rangers looked at their maps. There was no cabin in that valley, no record of any structure, no old homestead claims, nothing. They humored us and sent someone to check anyway, found nothing. No cabin, no clearing, no evidence anyone had been there. "You probably got turned around," the ranger told us. "Easy to do in that terrain. Maybe saw an old mine structure or something and thought it was a cabin." We didn't argue. The photos we'd taken won't display. The image files are corrupted, every single one from that day. Everything else on our cameras works fine. Just that day, just those photos. Alana and I don't talk about it much. She's in Portland now, I'm back in Seattle. But a few months ago, she sent me a text. "I've been dreaming about that cabin." Same dream every night for a week. In the dream, I'm walking back there. And I want to go. I really want to go. I told her not to. Told her it was just a dream, stress from school, nothing to worry about. But I've been having the same dreams, and the pull is getting stronger. Last week, I looked up flights to Bozeman. I caught myself with the credit card out, ready to book. I don't know why I want to go back. I just know that I do. And I'm starting to think Margaret was right. People do come back. We always come back. Story 9. The contract work seemed simple enough. Spend 2 weeks at a remote weather station northwest of Cut Bank, performing routine maintenance and calibration. The station had been unattended for 6 months, and someone needed to replace equipment and download data before winter shut down access completely. I took the job because the pay was good and because I'd just gotten divorced and needed to be somewhere that Isabel definitely was. Remote weather station in the middle of nowhere. Perfect. The helicopter dropped me off on a Tuesday morning in late September. The station sat on a ridge at about 9,000 feet, surrounded by absolutely nothing. Just tundra and rocks and distant peaks. The nearest road was 40 miles away. The nearest human being would be the pilot when he picked me up in 2 weeks. "You sure about this?" the pilot asked as we unloaded my supplies. His name was Hector, and he'd been flying these mountains for 30 years. "Weather can turn fast up here. You get stuck in a storm, you're on your own until it clears." "I'll be fine. I've done remote assignments before." "Not like this, you haven't." He gestured at the horizon. "Nothing but wilderness for 100 miles in every direction. You got the satellite phone?" "Yes. Use it if you need extraction." "Don't be a hero." He flew off and then I was alone. The silence was absolute. No cars, no planes, no human sounds of any kind, just wind and the occasional cry of a hawk. The weather station was a small building, maybe 15 by 20 feet, with solar panels on the roof and various meteorological instruments mounted on towers around it. Inside was basic, cot, propane heater, desk with computer equipment, shelves of spare parts and supplies. Everything I'd need for 2 weeks. I got to work. The equipment was standard stuff. Temperature sensors, anemometers, barometric pressure monitors. Most of it just needed cleaning and recalibration. By evening of the first day, I'd completed about a third of the work. I made dinner, freeze-dried beef stroganoff that tasted like salty cardboard, and sat outside watching the sunset. The sky turned colors I didn't have names for. The wind died completely. In that stillness, I could hear my own heartbeat. I thought about Isabel, about our empty house in Billings, about how quiet it had been after she left. This was different quiet. This was clean, uncomplicated, no memories attached to it. I slept well that first night. The second day, I ventured out from the station to check the remote sensors positioned around the ridge. They were scattered within a quarter-mile radius, each one recording data and transmitting it back to the main station. Sensor Array 3 wasn't working. I hiked out to it about 15 minutes from the station and found the problem immediately. Something had bent the mounting bracket, tilting the whole assembly at a weird angle. The metal was thick steel, not something that would bend easily. Probably snow load from last winter, I figured, though it seemed like it would take a lot of weight to bend it that severely. I was fixing it when I noticed the cairn. It sat about 50 yards away near a drop-off. A pile of rocks stacked deliberately, maybe 4 feet tall. I'd seen plenty of cairns before. Hikers build them as trail markers or just for fun, but this one felt different. The stones were arranged in a pattern that seemed intentional, and there was something dark between some of the rocks. Fabric, maybe. I walked over to investigate. The dark material was fabric, strips of canvas or leather, weather-beaten and faded, woven between the stones, and attached to some of the strips were objects: a rusted knife blade, a tarnished compass, what looked like a St. Christopher medal on a chain, personal items. Someone had built this cairn as a memorial. I took photos with my phone, more out of curiosity than anything else. Then I went back to the station and searched the historical records, found it eventually in a file labeled Station History. In March 1971, a weather technician named David Brennan had been stationed here alone. A spring storm had come in unexpectedly, severe enough that extraction wasn't possible. By the time the weather cleared 5 days later, Brennan was gone. They'd found the station intact, his supplies mostly unused, no sign of a struggle, just gone. The search teams had found tracks leading away from the station, heading southwest toward the cliff edge. The track stopped about where that cairn now sat. Below was a 200-foot drop onto rock. They never recovered a body. I sat at the desk, reading the report over and over. The conclusion was accidental death. Brennan had gotten disoriented in the storm, walked over the edge. Case closed, but something about the report bothered me. Brennan was experienced. He'd done 5 previous remote assignments. Why would he leave the station during a severe storm? That night I couldn't sleep, kept thinking about those tracks, about someone walking toward that cliff. I got up around 2 a.m. and made tea, stood at the window looking out at the darkness. Something moved out there. A shape, pale against the dark ground, walking slowly across the tundra. It was maybe 200 yards away, too far to see clearly, but definitely moving, human-sized or close to it. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the door. The shape had stopped moving. I shone the light across the tundra, but the beam didn't reach far enough, just illuminated rocks and low vegetation and nothing else. "Hello," I called out. My voice died instantly in the vastness. "Is someone there?" No answer. I watched for 10 more minutes, but the shape didn't reappear. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been an animal, a deer maybe, or an elk, except there were no trees out here, nothing for deer or elk to browse on, nothing to draw them to this elevation. I went back to bed but left the light on. The next day I worked with one eye, always scanning the horizon, saw nothing unusual, just endless tundra and rock and sky. By evening I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the shape. Then I found the first note. It was tucked under the weather station door, held in place by a small rock. Torn paper, words written in pencil. "Don't go outside after dark. It walks at night." The handwriting was shaky, almost illegible. The paper was old, yellowed. I stood there holding it, my heart doing unpleasant things. The helicopter was gone. The satellite phone was for emergencies only. The nearest person was 40 miles away, across terrain impassable on foot. I was completely, utterly alone, or I was supposed to be. That evening, I barricaded the door with the desk, kept the satellite phone in my pocket, didn't turn off any lights, sat on the cot with my back to the wall and watched the windows. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside, slow, measured, circling the building, around and around, never pausing. They stopped at the door. I heard breathing, wet, labored, wrong somehow, then scratching like fingers on metal. A voice whispered through the door, "Let me in." "I'm cold." My voice, my exact voice pleading. "Please, I've been out here so long, please let me in." I didn't move, barely breathed. The scratching continued, increasingly frantic, then silence. I waited 5 minutes, 10, nothing. Finally, I crept to the window and looked out. It was standing about 30 feet from the station. Tall and impossibly thin skin that looked gray in the moonlight. The face was almost human, would pass for human from a distance. But the body was wrong, joints in places joints shouldn't be, limbs that were too long, proportions that made my brain scream wrongness. It was looking at the station, looking at me through the window. Then it spoke again in my voice. "Why won't you let me in, Elijah? I'm you, I belong here." That was my name, Elijah Kozlov. I hadn't told anyone up here my name. It wasn't in any of the station logs. How did it know? The thing outside tilted its head. "I've been waiting since March 1971, waiting for someone to join me." David understood. He came out. He walked with me. David Brennan, the technician who disappeared. "Will you walk with me, Elijah?" I backed away from the window. The thing outside started moving again, circling the station, around and around. Sometimes walking, sometimes moving in other ways I don't have words for. I called the emergency number on the satellite phone. "Got a recording. All operators are busy. Please stay on the line." I left the line open, the phone on speaker, listening to hold music while that thing circled outside. Dawn came eventually. The circling stopped. I looked out the window carefully, nothing there. Just empty tundra. I packed everything I absolutely needed into my backpack. Food, water, the satellite phone, GPS, left everything else. I wasn't staying here another night. The problem was, the helicopter wasn't scheduled to return for 11 more days. And there was no road, no trail, no way out except 40 miles of wilderness to the nearest access point. I started walking southeast toward where my GPS showed the access road. 40 miles was doable. 3 days of hard hiking, maybe 4. I made it about 2 hours before I saw it. It was ahead of me on the ridge, standing perfectly still, waiting. I changed direction, headed more eastward, hiked for another hour. It appeared again, always ahead, always waiting. Every direction I tried, it cut me off, herding me back toward the station. Back toward that cliff edge where David Brennan's tracks had ended. By evening I was exhausted, dehydrated, terrified. I'd walked in circles all day and now I was back within sight of the station. The thing stood near the cairn, waiting. I made a decision. I ran, not toward any particular direction, just away. Across the tundra, over rocks, not caring where I went as long as it was away from that thing. I fell, rolled, got up and kept running. Found myself at the cliff edge, the 200-foot drop Brennan had walked over. The thing was behind me. I could hear it approaching, that wet breathing sound. I activated the satellite phone's emergency beacon, held it up like a talisman. "I'm not walking with you," I said. "I'm not David, I'm not staying." It stopped about 10 feet away. In the fading light, I could see it clearly now, see how its skin moved wrong, like something underneath was trying to rearrange itself, see how the face kept almost shifting, trying different configurations, searching for the right one. "Everyone stays eventually," it said in my voice. "The quiet calls them back, the loneliness. You felt it in that house in Billings, didn't you? After Isabel left, that emptiness. It knew about Isabel, about my house, about everything. I can take that away," it continued. I can fill that space. We'll walk together forever. No more loneliness, no more pain. For a second, just a second, I almost considered it. The thing was right. The emptiness after Isabel had been unbearable. That huge echoing house full of nothing. Then I thought, this thing has been here since 1971. It took David Brennan. It's been alone for 50 years, just like I've been alone, and it wants company so desperately it'll say anything. No, I said. It moved toward me. I stepped backward, right to the edge of the cliff. I'd rather fall than walk with you. We stood there deadlocked, me on the cliff edge, it blocking my escape. Then I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a helicopter. Hector's voice came over the satellite phone, which I'd forgotten was still connected. Elijah, I've got your beacon. I'm 2 minutes out. Where are you? The thing turned toward the sound. I ran, not away from it, toward it, past it while it was distracted, across the tundra toward where I could now see the helicopter approaching. Behind me, I heard it scream, not with my voice anymore, with something older, more primal. The sound of absolute rage and absolute loneliness combined. I didn't look back. Hector landed in a clearing. I scrambled into the helicopter and we lifted off within seconds. As we rose, I looked down. It was standing near the cairn, looking up. In the fading light, it almost looked like a person. Almost. You okay? Hector asked. The emergency beacon, what happened? Equipment failure, I lied. Couldn't stay without working systems. He accepted that. We flew back to Cut Bank and I never went back for the rest of my supplies. The weather service was annoyed about the abandoned equipment. I quit before they could fire me. That was 6 months ago. I live in Portland now, as far from Montana as I could get without leaving the country, but I still hear it sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn. My voice calling from somewhere outside, Elijah, come back, walk with me. Last week I got a package. Inside was that tarnished compass from the cairn and a note in shaky handwriting. Your turn to wait. Your turn to walk. We'll be together soon. I'm moving again, maybe Alaska, maybe somewhere with people around all the time, somewhere that's never ever quiet, because I'm starting to understand what David Brennan understood there at the end. The emptiness doesn't go away, it follows you, and eventually you get tired of running, eventually the loneliness wins. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments which story unsettled you most and share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there.